Hello Bible students, Brian Kelson with you again, setting a second attempt at the mystery Romans 16 part D. I wasn't happy with the first one, I pulled it down, I'm so sorry. If there are new viewers, and I suspect some mid-acts people are starting to watch my videos, if you are, welcome. Search and see, be a Berean, and just put aside for the moment that all Acts 28ers belong to a cult. Now, what we're trying to do is demonstrate that context is very important. And the context of the mystery in Romans 16:25 to 26 will help us determine what this mystery is, which was kept secret since the world began. By the way, don't forget to jump over to Substack and find Brian Kelson and subscribe to my lessons if you are new. Now today I want to use an example, but you say, Brian, please get on and tell me what the mystery is. Yes, I'm getting there, but I'm reinforcing a concept, preaching to the choir more than likely, but the fact is, this is an important opportunity. The word my gospel, or that little phrase there, can be impregnated through pogo stick eisegetics. I've explained that, jumping from this verse, reading the verse, and then going totally somewhere else to explain what it means. We can't do that. So what's my gospel in Romans? Well, the first thing that we did, remember, was to notice that the word establish in Romans 16:25 is the identical word in Romans 1:11, where Paul desired to visit the Romans and impart to them a spiritual gift in order that they would be established. Same word. So my gospel in this verse in Romans is linked with Paul's ministry that has supernatural gifts. Now, I didn't need to go to chapter 1. If you think that's a little thin, then let's go to Romans 15 and have a look at some verses there. Paul says in verse 16 of that chapter that he was a minister of Jesus Christ to the Gentiles, the gospel of God. He says in verse 18, I will not dare to speak of any of those things which Christ has not wrought by me, to make the Gentiles obedient by word and deed. And the word obedient goes back to Romans 16:25 and 6, where the mystery kept secret, the preaching Jesus Christ, was the obedience of the faith. Here's the word obedience, you see. See why these things are important? Verse 19, see mighty signs and wonders by the power of the Spirit of God, so that from Jerusalem and round about unto Illyricum I have fully preached the gospel of Christ. Yea, so have I strived to preach the gospel not where Christ was named, lest I should build upon another man's foundation. Oh, out among the Gentiles there were other people preaching? Actually, yes. Just because Paul was sent to the uncircumcision doesn't mean he was the only one doing that. And we will find that that is why 1 Corinthians 15 verse 11 is critically important. Whether they or I preached, so you believed. The Apostle Paul didn't differentiate in the faith of those who heard his message or those who heard somebody else's, including Peter's. Verse 21, but as it is written, to whom he was not spoken of, they shall see, and they that have not heard shall understand. And as I tried to point out one time, we're going to find the ears and the seeing all come to a dramatic Israel put aside conclusion in Acts 28 when Isaiah 6 is quoted for the last time. But, by the by, please note eyes and ears popping up. Now this is a quote from a prophet, and the prophet is Isaiah 52:15, and it says this, As many were astonished at thee, his visage was so marred more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men, Isaiah 52:14. So shall he sprinkle or startle many nations. The kings shall shut their mouths at him, for that which had not been told them shall they see, and that which they had not heard shall they consider. By the way, this leads on to Isaiah 53, which Paul quotes, doesn't he? Verse 1. In Romans, I believe, and we'll have a look at that just because I want to make sure that that is correct. who hath believed our report, and you'll find that in Romans 1, 17 to 18. No, who has believed our report? Yes, I had to get that right. Isaiah 53:1 is quoted in Romans 10. Okay, so we've got Isaiah quoted in Romans 15 regarding Paul's ministry among the Gentiles. It's fascinating, isn't it, that this is Paul's ministry based upon Isaiah, where he went based upon Isaiah. And of course we noticed in Romans 15 that he wanted to visit the Romans, which was exactly his desire in Romans chapter 1. Nevertheless, what I'm trying to say is that Paul's ministry in Romans, my gospel in Romans, the context demands that my gospel during the Acts period was accompanied by mighty signs and wonders, Romans 15:19. Now then, I want to just point out that mighty signs and wonders, or the gifts of the Spirit, are already found in 1 Corinthians. And I want to go there, not to 1 Corinthians 12, but I want to go to 1 Corinthians chapter 14 for a particular reason. 1 Corinthians 14. And you'll find that Paul says he speaks in tongues more than anybody. And he talks about how they were to conduct themselves in the ministry. He speaks in tongues more than them all in verse 18. Brethren, he says in verse 20, be not children in understanding, howbeit in malice be ye children, but in understanding be men. Now he's talking about the gifts, right? Verse 21 of 1 Corinthians 14, in the law it is written, with men of other tongues and other lips will I speak unto this people, and yet for all that they will not hear me, eyes and ears. See how it keeps popping up? They will not hear me. Now, this is a reference from Isaiah 28. So we've already had Romans 15 going to Isaiah, and that's about supernatural gifts in Paul's My Gospel in the Acts period. Now we've come to supernatural gifts in the letter that Paul wrote to the Corinthians, and we're in chapter 14. And now he's going to go and quote Isaiah 28. You know, for those of you who think that the 1 Corinthians 12, which speaks about a body as an analogy of supernatural gifts functioning together, for those of you who think that's the body of Christ or the church which is his body, well, here's the Apostle Paul 2 chapters later quoting the Old Testament regarding one of the gifts of the Spirit. I do not think that we have any right to do a pogo stick job again and import from Ephesians dispensational truths back into the Acts period in 1 Corinthians 12. I say no more. Christ is not the head of the church which is his body in 1 Corinthians 12. We are not members of the church which is his body, and we are not raised and seated in heavenly places, because in 1 Corinthians 15 the resurrection is to Isaiah and Hosea. So we can't put in a dispensational truth because we've bounced from 1 Corinthians 12 over to Ephesians and Colossians and drag it back in to a resurrection to the earth, now can we? Because we want to see Paul, my gospel, and we want to impregnate my gospel with dispensational truths after Acts 28. Can't do that. Okay, in the law it is written, with men of other tongues and other lips will I speak unto this people, and yet for all that they will not hear me. Isaiah 28. For precept, verse 10 of Isaiah 28, for precept must be upon precept. Precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little, there a little. For with stammering lips and another tongue will he speak to this people. Which people is this? I think it's the people of Israel, don't you? And I want to remember that for just a minute. In Isaiah 28:14 we have a stunning thing. We have the apostle, wherefore hear the word of the Lord. Was this the one I want? Oh no, Isaiah 28:16. Isaiah 28 quoted in 1 Corinthians 14. Please note how Paul's Acts period letters are intertwined with the Old Testament. They are underpinning what he writes. So Where he went in Romans 15 is based upon a prophecy from Isaiah 28. I'm in Isaiah 28. I want to show you something. In verse 16 of Isaiah 28, therefore thus saith the Lord God, behold, I lay in Zion for a foundation stone, a tried stone, a precious cornerstone, a sure foundation. He that believeth shall not make haste. Do you know that Romans, this is quoted in Romans 9:33. Isn't it interesting that Romans 10 goes to supernatural gifts, 1 Corinthians 14 goes to Isaiah 28. Isaiah 28 is quoted back in Romans chapter 9. Isn't it stunning? And this Paul quotes again in Romans chapter 10 when he's preaching his gospel about justification by faith. Isaiah 28 is in Romans 10:11. Please don't tell me that my gospel in the Acts period in the Apostle Paul contained dispensational truths of Ephesians and Colossians. That's just not true. Alright, that's Isaiah 28. And now we've gone back to Romans. But I want to go back to 1 Corinthians, and I want to go to 1 Corinthians 14, because you know when Paul's talking about these supernatural gifts which the prophet spoke about, therefore my gospel had gifts which were a part of prophecy, not a mystery hidden in God of Ephesians. Now we find out also in verse 22, immediately following the Isaiah 28 quote, Paul says this, wherefore tongues are for a sign, not to them that believe, to them that believe not. But prophesying serveth not for them that believe not, but for them which believe. And he's talking about what is more effective in the assembly. He's not discounting tongue speaking, is he? Because it's for a sign. Do you remember anything else about a sign in 1 Corinthians? You know, it's stunning, isn't it, how the Bible, when we compare spiritual with spiritual, helps us to see that context explains things. So I'm going to get to the mystery of Romans 16, but I'm proving before I get there that context will not allow us to pogo stick over to Ephesians to explain the mystery of Romans 16. 1 Corinthians 1. Talking about supernatural gifts, you can read from verse 4 all the way down to verse 7, verse 8 even if you like, that the supernatural gifts were a confirmation of the gospel that they heard. They came behind in no gift, waiting for the parousia, the apocalypse, the coming of the Lord. And of course, in 1 Corinthians 15, the coming of the Lord to the Corinthians in the Acts period, and my gospel of the Apostle Paul, was all about a trumpet, a feast of Israel, and a resurrection to the earth, right? Now, Paul says, a little later on, he's talking about the divisions about the different preachers, but he talks in verse 18 about the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness, but unto us which are saved is the power of God. Romans 1, the power of God in that gospel that he took out of Habakkuk. Remember? Power of God. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? 1 Corinthians 1:20. The wisdom of the world, foolishness to God. Verse 22 of 1 Corinthians 1, for the Jews require a sign. Didn't he say in chapter 14 that tongue speaking was a sign? Well, who is the sign for? The unbeliever. The unbeliever who? The unbeliever Israelites. And you know in the Acts period, despite the fact that Paul was sent to the uncircumcision or the nations, his gospel included signs, one of which was from prophecy, one of which was tongue speaking, which was a sign for the Jews. And when Paul went anywhere in the Acts period, most of the time, it was to the synagogue of the Jews, right? But we preach Christ crucified, unto the Jews a stumbling block, and unto the Greeks foolishness. Now this thought doesn't change when we come over to chapter 2. In chapter 2, verse 6, he says, howbeit we speak wisdom among them that are perfect or mature, yet not the wisdom of this world, he's been talking about it in chapter 1, nor of the princes of this world that come to naught, but we speak the wisdom of God in a mystery, even the hidden wisdom which God ordained before the world unto our glory. Well, before the world doesn't authorize us to go and talk about the mystery hidden God in Ephesians, does it? Because we're about to find something. Verse 8, which none of the princes of this world knew, for had they known it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. The Lord of Glory is a very strong reference to Jehovah of the Old Testament, but that's for you to search and see. Verse 9, but as it is written, eye has not seen nor ear heard. Oh, here we come to ears again, right? Neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. Now, this is a quote, and I have to get it for you. This is a quote from Isaiah 64. Isaiah 64:4. For since the beginning of the world men have not heard, nor perceived by the ear, neither hath the eye seen, O God, beside thee, what he hath prepared for him that waiteth for thee. Do you know this passage is about a melting fire and waters boiled when God came down and rendered the heavens and the mountains might fly down at their presence? I think there's also a hint of revelation in all that, you see. So here's Paul in Isaiah in 1 Corinthians 14. He's in Isaiah in 1 Corinthians chapter 2 explaining the wisdom that was hid. Hey, see how important context is. So this wisdom of God in a mystery in 1 Corinthians 2:7, even the hidden wisdom, is endorsed by a quote from Isaiah 64. Isaiah, the one he quoted back in Romans 15, Romans 11, 1 Corinthians 14, and we were talking about the wisdom in chapter 1, weren't we? Wait, I missed something. Let me go back to chapter 1 again. And he says this, for the preaching of the cross, verse 18, is to them that perish foolishness, but unto us which are saved is the power of God. I've read this. Verse 19, for it is written, it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and will bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. So the mystery of 1 Corinthians 2 is a part of an argument that Paul's been developing from chapter 1. And here he goes quoting, guess what? Isaiah again. Let's have a look at Isaiah. And do you know it's Isaiah 29? So he starts in chapter 1 with Isaiah 29. In chapter 2 is Isaiah 64. In chapter 14, and we're talking about wisdom and gifts, aren't we? That's the context. This is Paul's gospel in the Acts period. 3 times he's quoted Isaiah in our references, and we haven't looked at all of them. So here's 1 Corinthians 1:19 in Isaiah 29:14. Therefore, behold, I will proceed to do a marvellous work among this people, even a marvellous work and a wonder. For the wisdom of their wise men shall perish, and the understanding of their prudent men shall be hid. I wonder who the princes of the world were in 1 Corinthians 2. I think it might be the leaders of Israel myself, just by looking at Scripture, don't you? Now then, there's something else in Isaiah 29 I want to bring out. So we've seen Isaiah 29, verse 14 quoted in 1 Corinthians 1, right? Look at verse 10 of Isaiah 29. Stay yourselves and wonder, cry ye out and cry. They are drunken, but not with wine. They stagger, but not with strong drink. Verse 10, for the Lord hath poured out upon you the spirit of deep sleep, and hath closed your eyes. The prophets and your rulers, the seers, hath he covered. Did you know this is quoted in Romans 11, verse 8? See, we started in Romans 16, we looked at supernatural gifts, we looked at Romans 15, which quoted Isaiah, then we went over to supernatural gifts in 1 Corinthians 14, which quoted Isaiah, then we went to 1 Corinthians 1 and 2, because the Jews asked for a sign, and 1 Corinthians 14 said tongues were for a sign, and we're back in Isaiah 29, which is quoted in Romans, Isaiah 28, that's also quoted in Romans. While we're here, I want to make sure about that. Give me a minute. Oh yes, Isaiah 28:16 is quoted in Romans, isn't it? I mentioned that. But did you notice that it's behold I lay in Zion? Isn't it interesting that Romans 9, 10 and 11 is about Zion? The elect remnant. It's all about Zion. There's nothing in Romans in the central portion, that dispensational section, is about heavenly places. So my gospel in Romans 16 cannot have any dispensational truth out of Ephesians in it. That's what's important. So what I've been doing is looking at my gospel in Romans 16 because it's linked to the mystery kept secret since the world began, right? So all that I'm doing now in this video is also showing a context for this mystery. Very important. Now, my gospel occurs previously in Paul's letter to the Romans, not just chapter 16. He's already used it in Romans 2:16. In the day when God shall judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ according to my gospel. Do you know in chapter 2 of Romans it's Jew first? So my gospel in the Acts period, in the apostles, staying in context, is about supernatural gifts. It's about his ministry to the Gentiles, but it's based entirely upon prophecy, because we've quoted prophecy just as much as we've quoted Paul. And here in chapter 2 of Romans it's Jew first, which it was in chapter 1, right? And remember that word power? Verse 16, isn't it? I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power, which we've seen already, of God unto salvation to every one that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as is written, the just shall live by faith. We're in Habakkuk. My gospel in Paul, in the Acts period, in the context of a mystery kept secret, is all based upon prophecy. That's Paul's gospel. That's my gospel in the book of Romans. Now, I hope somehow this helps you to understand whatever this mystery of Romans 16, it's got to be something to do with what was written aforetime. Oh wait, the hope of Romans 15. Verse 4, for whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comforts of the Scriptures might have hope. Now the God of patience and consolation, you see, and that hope, remember, is based upon confirm the promises made to the fathers in verse 8, and then he quotes all the Old Testament. So now we have, remember, comfort of the Scriptures. And what, finally, coming back to Romans 16, this mystery, which is part of Paul's gospel, was made manifest and by the Scriptures of the prophets. So whatever this secret is, and accompanied by my gospel and all that my gospel meant in the Acts period, we have got a mystery which somehow was in the things written aforetime. The Lord bless you as you search and see.